Hello everyone, my name is Solvashas and welcome to this Threshold review. Today we are back in X-Plane because we are going to be reviewing at long last the iniSimulations A300-600RF. This plane came out a little over a month ago and has been talked about quite a lot in the X-Plane scene, but it kind of got overshadowed by Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And that really sucks because the plane is a fantastic plane, as you will learn in a few seconds. We've been working on this review since the aircraft's release, and we're really happy to bring it to you today. And this is also Threshold's first aircraft review on our YouTube channel, so we're really excited about that. Before we get into this review today, I would like to let you all know that this review was not done solely by me. This review was done by two other people. We have our very own Garrett Yolk and Peter Tramp, who have helped me out in reviewing this aircraft. I've done a lot of the sounds reviewing. Garrett has done general systems and also general features of the aircraft, and Peter has gone deep and has looked at the visuals of the aircraft and has made sure to review those. So thank you to both of you so much for helping out on this review. I'm really excited to get into it, but one more quick thing. This review is going to be rather long since we get into quite a bit of detail, so if you would like to skip to any part of the video, then you can do so by checking the description. We will have timestamps that lead to specific areas of the aircraft review. And then you can also see in your scroll bar in the bottom of YouTube that there will be subtitles based off of where you are in the video. So you can hover over and you can choose where you want to go. So without further ado, now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. First thing we are going to talk about is systems, and we're going to do that by having a quick introduction, then talking about the general quality, some immersive details, the EFB, extra systems, and then we will wrap everything up at the end. So a lot of this has been done by Garrett. Once again, Garrett, thank you so much for taking the time to look into the systems of the aircraft. Overall, iniBuilds has truly nailed the systems. They've used a lot of custom plugins as a foundation, and that makes for a really great simulation. Compared to other add-ons, the A300 is top tier. On their website, iniBuilds states that the A300 includes custom system rendition, including hydraulic, electrical, pressurization, and fuel operation, and a detailed FMS with SIDS, stars, a second flight plan option, custom VNAV and LNAV, altitude and speed constraints, and holds. Through rigorous testing, we have found that the systems perform exactly as advertised, with the exception of maybe the VNAV, but that is only at first sight. The VNAV is going to appear to be a little bit finicky, but one thing that's really important to note is that iniBuilds has worked exclusively with pilots of the A300 who work on the line with the aircraft. And although it seems like the VNAV may be finicky, this is actually true to how the real aircraft acts. Remember, this is a very old aircraft. Airbus and Boeing at this time were still experimenting with a lot of autopilot features, so Airbus truly didn't nail the VNAV curve that we now see on modern Airbuses these days, the really smooth one. So the plane really likes to take off and jolt you around. So it may appear at first that the VNAV is finicky, but in truth, this is just a characteristic of the aircraft. A feature not listed on the iniBuilds website is Autoland. And this is a shame because Autoland is a great feature. Although using Autoland in the old aircraft is quite rare, we tested the Autoland once to see how it was, and in our test run, we dialed in the approach speed that the FMS gave us, then engaged the land button and put it in both autopilots. The aircraft flew a very stable approach. Over the numbers, the A300 kicked in some left rudder to straighten out the nose and touched down relatively smoothly with the left wheel touching down on the centerline. The spoilers, armed and advanced, deployed, the auto brake activated, and then reverse thrust was engaged as the aircraft kept itself on the centerline. Overall, despite doing only one test, it seems like the Autoland works relatively well in the A300, further proving the quality of the add-on systems. And also, unlike some add-ons, the user experience that surrounds the systems is relatively smooth, lacking many glitches, bugs, or general inconsistencies. This could almost be considered rare for newly released add-ons in the flight simulator world, especially for X-Plane. And in addition to that, iniBelts has done a fantastic job in making sure that the aircraft is updated. They released 2 updates in the weeks after the aircraft was released, and recently they released another update which had over 200 changes in the changelog. So they are very on top of making sure that the A300 is and has the best experience possible. Now we're going to move on to some immersive details. As mentioned when we were talking about the VNav, because the A300 is older, the systems in the A300 tend to lag a bit, and that is accurate. iniBelts has actually done this in their rendition of the aircraft. So for example, when you zoom in and out of the MFD, a range change label accompanies a pause between zoom levels while the computer calculates what the zoomed in view will look like. Similarly, when the FMS makes a calculation, it will go black for a short moment. On a related note, the systems also look old. For example, you can tell that the PFD and MFD are CRT displays, which is similar to old TVs. So when you zoom in on these displays, you can make out the pattern of pixels that make up the screen and the faint glow from the old display technology. This is really cool. I'm going to demonstrate this really quickly. So if you hop into the cockpit, we're going to just throw on the batteries right now and get the GPU all in here. You just throw this on and we go over here. First off, you can see the pixels. You can see the little lights right here, which is really awesome. And then if you go down, you can see the curve in the display. You can see how it's curving right there. So that is a really awesome feature. We'll continue the rest of the immersive details from the cockpit. The fact that iniBelts has included little technological quirks like this that wouldn't necessarily be documented in a manual really goes to show how detailed this airplane is. And I will also say that it goes to show how much time they have taken to check in with pilots of the aircraft to make sure that the airplane is as accurate as possible. Next, we're going to go to the EFB. The EFB is usually used to help the pilot navigate older systems. A feature-filled EFB tablet is included, and we see it right here. This touch of modernity balances the age that the airplane's avionics show. The EFB sits at the base of the middle left cockpit window right here, similar to that of the Zibo's 737. This tablet will handle performance calculations, ground services, panel states, and checklists. You can see most of those right here. Your load manager, your load sheet, your ground services, and if you click on some of them, then you'll have some expansion of that. So right here you have fuel, then you have cargo. This is your general load sheet. It's gonna bounce like crazy because I just put in a bunch of random stuff. And then if you return, then you can just do anything right here, from returning or from going to the EFB drop-down menu right here. All these features work really well. However, every once in a while, we couldn't get the performance calculations to work. This is also partly due to the fact that we were relatively new with the aircraft when we first got it, and some of these things have been fixed, but every once in a while, calculations don't seem to appear. So make sure that you read the manual to make sure you are doing it entirely correctly, because in the beginning, another reason why we weren't getting these calculations is because we were missing 1 or 2 steps in there in order to get accurate calculations. One feature that we really appreciated in the EFB was the ATIS function. On the ATIS page, which is right here, the EFB will grab real-world weather off of the internet for your departure and arrival airports. This weather data then informs the EFB's performance calculations and also makes the weather very handy for when you need the altimeter or a quick wind check. However, one thing that we did not like about the EFB is that it cannot be hidden. It can be turned off, but it cannot be hidden. One great thing about flight simulators is their ability to take the pilot back in time for historical flights. A modern tablet like this would ruin some of the immersion in cases like these, so we think that iniBelts should consider adding an option to hide the EFB in the future. Lastly, it's worth noting that iniBelts has even simulated systems outside of the cockpit. A small panel in the cargo hold of the airplane is included. There's actually one here, and if you go through here, there's another one right there by the door. It can be used to open and close the A300's doors and can also control the cargo hold lighting. So let me just demonstrate that really quickly. If we go back to this one, because this is really great for showing the lighting, and go to the panel right here, if you want to change the lights, you can turn them on here. You can turn them on in the entry area or on the tarmac. You can kind of see it right over here. You can see how it's kind of turning on and off. It's a little bit hard to see right now during the day, a little bit easier at night. And then you can also open up the cargo door by holding this, and the cargo door will open. Then you can just sneak over here and you can see that the cargo door is now opening. Really, really cool stuff. And the animation is really nice as well. Nice and slow, just like it would be in the real aircraft, because I've noticed a lot of the time that sometimes developers will make these animations extremely fast, and it takes away from the immersion since these doors are typically rather slow with their hydraulics. So now that we're watching the door open up, we're going to conclude our look at the systems. Although iniBuilds has nailed the A300 systems, they do come at a heavy cost. On average, we found that iniBuild's custom plugins that they use for the systems decreased performance by upwards of 20 frames per second. This has been improved in later updates, but there is still a performance hit every once in a while, so you do need to keep that in mind, that you might need to alter some of your settings when you are flying with the iniBuild's A300. But you do have to keep in mind that detailed systems are going to cause a notable performance decrease in all cases, so performance will never be perfect with this much detail. Overall, users who appreciate high-quality system simulation will love the iniBuild's A300. That is, as long as they have a PC that can handle it. The next thing we're going to talk about is handling. And in order to talk about handling, we need to first understand how the A300 does not fly. So, comparing this plane to other Airbus models, Airbus is known for their fly-by-wire system and the fact that their aircraft are controlled by small side sticks. But the Airbus A300 is an exception to both of these rules, as it is a yoke-controlled and lacks fly-by-wire. This means that you have to trim the A300 unlike all of Airbus's other aircraft, and also, it feels a lot different than an A320, for example. Because of this, simmers who enjoy flying other Airbus models shouldn't expect the A300 to be similar. So let's talk about how it flies. It feels quite heavy and is not overly responsive to inputs, but this will obviously vary depending on your hardware. For testing this handling, we used the CH Products Flight Sim yoke. After takeoff, it is smooth to hand fly, but this smoothness seems to sacrifice a little bit of precision, making it slightly harder to land than some modern aircraft, especially in turbulence or a crosswind. We also found the trimming of the A300 seems to be a little too sensitive. So, for example, when you just tap back on the trim, the airplane will pitch up slightly more than expected. Because of this, it is harder than it should be to get the trim set correctly. But real pilot accounts seem to indicate that the real A300 is very nice to trim, contradicting iniBuilds' rendition. But this is by no means a deal breaker and could be fixed in future updates. Relative to other add-ons, the iniBuilds handles similarly to the IXCG 737. It's just a bit stiffer than normal. But despite the sluggish handling, the airplane is by no means sluggish. In fact, the engines seem overpowered relative to comparable airliners, which is very realistic. In the A300, the engines are extremely overpowered for the plane that it is flying. When taking off, once the engines reach the takeoff setting, the A300 accelerates very quickly and does not hesitate to lift off. You have to make sure that you have the aircraft trimmed properly, otherwise the plane will literally take off without you. After takeoff, the A300 also climbs very quickly in most circumstances, even fully loaded. Now that we've gone through the systems and the handling of the aircraft, now we're going to talk about the visuals. In the visuals department, the iniBuilds A300 checks off a plethora of boxes, covering all engine variants, including the upcoming passenger model. In this section, we'll explore the modeling and texturing features separately and discuss some bizarre design choices, some of which presumably can be categorized as, quote, rookie mistakes, while we take a walk around the plane. Let's begin. For the most part, the modeling is done beautifully in the flight tech. In the areas where users look at the most, the team at iniBuilds put extra care and effort into it. The cockpit modeling is arguably one of the most solidly rendered visual works for any airliner in X-Plane. There seems to be little to no shortcuts attempted at replicating every crack and crevice of the flight deck. An area that most developers put an afterthought to is the area beyond the front panels that meets the front windshield. On the iniBuilds A300, equal attention was put into the texturing and detailing of that section, and although there's little practical benefit given from that focus into modeling that area, it's the details that put together an all-around immersive flying experience. So we can see that by going up here. You can see how this is done really, really nicely over here. There hasn't been any shortcuts, and this has the same level of detail as the rest of the cockpit. If you crank your head to the back, you'll find that the circuit breakers and jump seats are as well done with the same consideration and attention put into the front of the flight deck, at least from brief observation. So right here we can see the circuit breaker panel. Looks fantastic. A lot of other developers tend to just put a very low resolution image where the circuit breakers would be, so it's really nice to see iniBuilds actually take the time for that. And right there you can also see the jump seat is really nicely done as well. The specks of dust accumulating within the crevices of the screen is a recurring feature on each glass-covered instrument. We're looking at one right here. While iniBuilds are not the pioneers of producing dusty flight deck panels, it is one of the nicest implementations yet in X-Plane. To put the cockpit texturing in one phrase, God tier. A brief look into the textures of the cockpit also shows the decent meticulous control over reproducing the paint weathering, providing an inconsistent, varied look across the flight deck. The only gripe from the cockpit in general is the weathering logic. Weathering logic being how the dirt and cosmetic damage accumulate and are textured, which is mostly correct, but certain areas of the cockpit seem overworn, and you wouldn't be able to see how it wears out that way. This is a recurring issue for most products on the market today, though, in that any dirt or scratches do not show any logic behind them. They're just there to make it look old, as if they're reproducing a cockpit that was purposefully worn down, using sandpaper to scrub each and every corner. As you open the cockpit door to the cabin, you'll begin to see that the detailing is taken down a notch. Though the modeling was done pretty well, the textures seem a little bit less polished. Beginning with the walls, the cabin paneling appears hastily stitched together, with varying shades of creme beige and gray shades. The line work also falls apart at this point, where panels adjacent to the door were drawn with a permanent marker, and the passenger windows were drawn with dark beige-looking lines. One of the lines does not add up, which is a basic oversight that should be easy to fix. These minor details could let you observe where the developer put their attention towards. And at this stage, I would say the cabin work quality is around the equivalent to a modern flight factor offering, e.g. the 767 or the 757. These minor details could let you observe where the developer put their attention towards, and at this stage I would say the cabin work quality is around the equivalent of a modern flight factor offering, modern being their most recent releases like the 767 and the 757 V2. Wrapping up, despite several minor overlooked details, the modeling and textures complement each other beautifully. There is no jarring fault a user can instantly notice unless you know your A300's front and back, or a creative observer who likes to nitpick mostly unimportant things that are on the verge of irrational. And Peter wrote a little message in his notes saying that he is one of those people who nitpicks small details. Now let's move on to the exterior. In contrast to the flight deck, the exterior unfortunately wasn't done to the same caliber. It will definitely pass in the texturing department, albeit with seemingly different styling applied compared to the flight deck. Well proportioned to the real-life counterpart, the A300 is modeled pretty well at first glance. However, there are some glaring issues with the form factor in several areas of the aircraft. The exterior is very high poly, and doesn't appear to be optimized for proper simulator use, upon closer observation through importing the objects into a 3D modeling program. The excessive use of subdivisions has inadvertently deformed some areas, resulting in a sculptured organic look. This result is particularly evident when you look closely at the shape of the cockpit windshields. The nose is one major drawback that let the modeling down. To put it slightly, the area surrounding the windows are erroneously modeled. To visualize how misplaced the windows are, Peter modeled his own A300 nose as a reference for where and how the windshields and radome should be. The front windshields are around 75% shorter, and the vertical slant of the front windshields, if you see the nose from the top, is slanted around 50% less. Resultantly, the two side windshields at the back are positioned further forwards. The transition from the point between the front windshields and the side cockpit windows to the nose radome is not modeled properly either, so at certain angles the nose looks odd. The change in contour should start below the front windshield, not at the start of the radome. Moving back to the cargo door, the angle of the door appears to line up with the floor, and not the fuselage itself. Not entirely sure why this was cut that way, but given that the A300s to A330/A340 aircraft has a slight nose-down angle, the 3D modeler presumably manually angled the fuselage down, then cut the cargo doors, which is a no-no. We're at the wings now. The unique Kruger flap that was introduced on the A300B2K and A300B4 between the fuselage and the wing joint is modeled very well. The texturing didn't do it justice though, but at least it's nothing like Cremosoft. As we move further down the wing box towards the tip of the wing, things once again fall apart a bit. The hydraulic arms that drive the slat's movement floats away from the wing at full extension. This may be a quick fix down the line, but it's a glaring issue that makes the plane look broken. Not much attention was put into the flap and spoiler mechanisms. There are fill-in details to populate the area so it doesn't look barren, and that is okay. The outboard and inboard slats don't align perfectly, however, which may be a minor animation fix, but we'll see. The engines were done relatively well, though I'd argue that the thrust reverser's translation sleeves were too thin, and there isn't a lot of detail put into the reverser cascade panels, the netted component that's exposed when the reverser sleeve extends back. In addition, the forward frame that connects the cowlings to the cascade panels are narrow, as the panels themselves are situated too close to the surface of the nacelles. As for the texturing, the A300 exterior texturing is best described as the result if one were to place a AAA game asset developer into a flight simulator aircraft development team. The approach to texturing is not one that aims to bring the most technically accurate visuals to the board, but a plausible representation on the fundamentals of aircraft appearance. Stressed fuselage skins, weathered bare metals, and a couple of scratched paneling thrown into the mix to produce a visually convincing aged airliner. A big highlight on the exterior is the landing gear. It is one of the most well-done textures that I've seen. The weathering, scratches, and dirt look very natural and make sense. Namely, the swirls of grease surrounding the armature connecting to the main strut looks wholesomely delicious, simulating hundreds of hours of constant gear movement from that pivot point. It's not replicated by any other developers, and I am glad to see that worked into this product. One sticking point is the engine spinning fan texture. Under most lighting conditions, it looks as though you're staring into a void, which shouldn't be the case. Brightening the texture will help naturally add more visible detail to the disc texture. More detail to the inlet texture could be added too, namely to reduce the illusion of a spinning disc shape replicating the visuals of a spinning jet engine. There are a couple of other rookie mistakes that the team did which can easily be rectified. The most jarring one is the use of a hard-modeled two-sided geometry everywhere. For a typical exterior aircraft model, the visual artist would model surfaces that are visible to the user, the surfaces facing outwards to be specific, but in the case of this A300, 3D modeler has purposefully duplicated the model, inverted the normal, which is the direction the surfaces are facing, inwards, so that if a user ever hovers their camera inside a wing, they can still see the wing, albeit with the surfaces flipped. An attempt to undo was proven unsuccessful. I've opened the models in AC3D, selected all the faces, and then switched the polytype to one-sided, and discovered that instead of using X-Plane's built-in two-sided geometry attributes, the modeler has literally duplicated the mesh and flipped the normals. This means that X-Plane is rendering twice the necessary amount of polygons, and given the high poly subdivided nature of the mesh, this most definitely is not an optimized 3D model. As such, running the A300 commands a higher than usual system requirement. And this lines up with what we were saying about performance when we were talking about systems as well. Furthermore, there are some prominent UV misalignments that may or may not affect the integrity of the delivery work's accuracy, although that may not be a problem in the long run, as we are aware that the team has a proprietary painting method that neglects the use of a Photoshop to directly paint on the textures due to challenges in painting using the UV mapping. In conclusion, we're not sure what iniBuilds' workflow is, whether the visual development team has a dedicated modeling and texturing team, or the developers do both, but the result speaks of a consistent, nearly perfected put-together product. Given the public display of a responsive community engagement on the iniBuilds team behalf, I feel confident that they will issue improvements for the A300 down the line. Finally, moving on to the sounds, the best way for me to talk about the sounds is to actually start up the aircraft and go through the sounds as we move along. One thing that iniBuilds has done a fantastic job with are the sounds inside the cockpit. We're going to start up the cockpit right now, turn on the batteries, and then we'll throw in the external power and you will see what I mean. The little whine that was present there of the fan starting up for the avionics is a fantastic example of the fact that iniBuilds has done a fantastic job with the sounds inside the cockpit. Every single little switch has a sound to it. Every single button has a sound to it. The entire cockpit just screams sound. It is really fantastically done. And since the early days of the cockpit, they have also done a really great job reducing the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect used to be rather intense in the cockpit, but now it is a lot better. One thing they have also done rather well is working on the transitions of sounds. So once you're in the cockpit right here and you step through this door, you hear how the sounds of the cockpit fade away, and then you are just greeted with the air that is flowing into the cabin. Really, really great job there. One thing that is a little bit strange, though, is the sounds of the doors, the cargo doors, and we'll demonstrate that in a moment by opening the cargo doors, just getting the lights on for right now. They don't really seem like they have any base to them. It seems like they are just randomly put in there. And the reason I say that is because the timing of things does not correspond to the animation. So if we throw it open right now, you'll hear this noise that simply does not correspond to the animation. And that's a little bit strange and makes it seem out of place for an otherwise great sound replication in the cockpit and the cabin. The A300-600RF uses a Honeywell 331-250 auxiliary power unit. Let's start up the APU, hop outside, and we'll talk about how it sounds. In comparing the sounds that iniBuilds has replicated in their A300 to actual sounds of the Honeywell 331-250, there are some great qualities of it and there are some bad qualities of it. iniBuilds has definitely done a great job nailing the higher portion of the sound, but it is lacking some bass. The actual sound of the auxiliary power unit kind of has a heaviness to it. It feels like it's being pushed to start, not like it's so seamlessly starting as iniBuilds has made it seem as if this APU starts in real life. However, despite this, the idling sound of the APU is done really fantastically and sounds exactly as the Honeywell sounds in real life. One thing that iniBuilds has fixed since the release of the aircraft is the Doppler effect. In the very early days of the aircraft, version 1, the Doppler effect around the aircraft was extremely intense and it was very, very inaccurate. However, since then, there has been a complete sound overhaul of the exterior sounds, and the Doppler effect outside is actually really solid. can take a look at it right here. Now we're in the back of the aircraft right here, and as we move around, I will be quiet for a moment so that you can hear. You'll notice how the Doppler effect is rather smooth and isn't at all fidgety like it used to be. The rest of the sounds, save for the engines, followed the same qualities as the APU. They sound really great, especially in the higher range, but occasionally they lack in the bass and they sound a little bit weird. Specifically, the packs sound a little bit off. However, this is not something that you're going to notice that much, so I'm not going to harp on it an extreme amount. Now we're going to close the doors and we're going to start one of the engines, and we'll talk about how that sounds. So as the engine continues to start up, we'll talk about the sounds. The sounds are done rather well. As I said before, it's lacking bass, but it definitely has the higher squeal that is characteristic of these GE engines. However, one thing that really bothered me is that in the later parts of the animation, which is right now, if you listen closely, you can hear the sound repeated, the sound of idle being repeated over and over and over. There isn't a distinct click to it, and you do need to have higher quality earphones in order to notice this. I tested these on Grado SR80 headphones, which are studio headphones, and then I compared using some Bose Quiet Comforts that I normally use when I'm not evaluating sound. And I couldn't hear it on the Quiet Comforts, but I could definitely hear it on the SR80s. It is not distracting, and you definitely have to pay attention to it, but this is one thing to pay attention to with the sounds. Overall, though, iniBuilds has done a fantastic job with the sounds, save for a few minor things in the exterior which I have mentioned. So what does all this mean for the iniBuilds A300-600? Well, wrapping up the scores of Garrett, Peter, and myself, the aircraft deserves a 9 out of 10. Overall, a fantastic simulation and great for somebody who has just entered the aircraft market. However, there are minor things here and there in all departments that could be improved in order to make the aircraft better. Thank you so much for watching this Threshold video. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to see more content like this, please be sure to subscribe. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a like. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know. Do you think a 9 out of 10 is a suitable rating for this aircraft? I would love to hear your opinion in the comments. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you in the next Threshold video.